A cruel daughter abandons her own mother with amnesia at a ship port, hoping to find a wealthy man. But when she discovers her suitor's true intentions, she tries to stop the ship, only to realize it's too late, and what follows is devastating. At 28 years old, Cynthia carried the burden of caring for her mother, Donna, alone, a task she had taken on since the sudden death of her father 5 years earlier. Rising silently, Cynthia walked to the adjacent room. She slowly opened the door, revealing the small space where her mother slept. Donna, her gray hair scattered across the pillow, looked so fragile and peaceful. Cynthia felt a pang in her heart, remembering the strong, vibrant woman her mother used to be before amnesia had turned her into a shadow of herself. "Cynthia, my dear, is that you?" Donna's trembling, uncertain voice broke the morning silence. "Yes, Mom, it's me." Cynthia forced a smile, moving closer to the bed. "How are you feeling today?" Donna blinked several times, her blue-gray eyes struggling to focus on her daughter's face. I'm not sure. Where are we? This isn't our home in Hartford, is it?" Cynthia's heart sank. They had moved from Hartford to this small Connecticut town 3 years ago. But for Donna, that memory was lost in the labyrinth of her mind. "No, Mom, we moved, remember? We're in our new home now." "Come on, let me help you get up. It's time for your breakfast and your medication." Gently, Cynthia helped Donna sit up, then guided her carefully to the kitchen. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, mingling with the smell of toast. Cynthia served a cup for her mother, placing a small plate with the colorful pills that kept Donna stable next to it. As her mother ate slowly, Cynthia glanced at the clock. Her stomach tightened as she realized she was late for work. Again. "Mom, I need to go to work now. Mrs. Peterson will be here with you today, okay?" Cynthia said, referring to the elderly neighbor who kindly agreed to help out a few times a week. Donna nodded absent-mindedly, her eyes fixed on the coffee cup. "Cynthia!" she called when her daughter was already at the door. "You're coming back, aren't you?" The question, so innocent yet so laden with fear, made Cynthia swallow hard. "Of course I am, Mom. I always come back. I promise." With one last look at her mother, Cynthia left, feeling the weight of the world on her shoulders. The walk to the accounting office where she worked was short, but each step felt like it took an eternity. Upon arriving, she was met with disapproving looks from her colleagues. Ashley, a tall blonde with perfectly manicured nails, wasted no time making a comment. "Late again, Cyn? Honestly, I don't know how you still have this job." Cynthia ignored the remark, heading straight to her desk. But before she could sit down, Megan, another colleague, approached with a forced smile. "Hey, Cynthia, some of us are going out tonight. Why don't you come along? It would be good for you to have some fun, you know?" Cynthia forced a smile, feeling a mix of gratitude for the offer and frustration at the constant pressure. "Thanks, Megan, but I can't." "My mom?" Megan interrupted, rolling her eyes. Your mom, always your mom? Cyn, you need to live a little. Have you ever thought about, putting her in a place where they can take care of her properly?" Megan's words hit Cynthia like a punch to the stomach. The idea of getting rid of her mother, as if she were a burden, an obstacle to her happiness, was repulsive. But at the same time, a small part of her, a part she was ashamed to admit existed, wondered what her life would be like if... "No, Megan," Cynthia responded firmly, cutting off her own thoughts. "My mom needs me. She's my family." With that, Cynthia turned to her computer, diving into work to escape the looks of pity and judgment from her colleagues. The hours dragged on, each minute a battle between duty and desire, between love and resentment. When the clock finally marked the end of the workday, Cynthia was the first to leave. She walked quickly through the familiar streets, eager to return home to her mother. But with each step, she felt the weight of her life, the exhaustion of her routine, and the loneliness that seemed to grow with each passing day. As she opened the door to her house, she was met by silence. "Donna?" "Mom?" she called, feeling the familiar panic rise in her throat. "I'm here, dear." Donna's voice came from the living room, where she was sitting, looking out the window. For a brief moment, her eyes sparkled with recognition. "You came back." Cynthia felt the tears she had been holding back all day finally escape. "Yes, Mom, I came back. I always come back." That night, as she helped her mother get ready for bed, Cynthia wondered how much longer she could keep going like this. Her love for her mother was unconditional, but the burden was heavy. And somewhere deep in her mind, a voice whispered that maybe, just maybe, there was another way out. The months dragged on like a slow, relentless tide, each day bringing new challenges for Cynthia Thompson. Fall had arrived in Connecticut, painting the trees in shades of red and gold, but for Cynthia, the world seemed increasingly gray. On a particularly cold October night, Cynthia sat at the kitchen table, a pile of medical bills spread out in front of her. The dim light from the lamp cast long shadows on the wall, reflecting Cynthia's gloomy mood. She stared at the numbers, feeling their weight in her chest. How am I going to pay all this? Cynthia murmured to herself, running her fingers through her already disheveled hair. From the next room came Donna's weak, confused voice. Cynthia? Cynthia, are you there? Cynthia closed her eyes for a moment, gathering her strength before responding. I'm here, Mom, I'm coming. Entering Donna's room, Cynthia was met with a vacant stare. Her mother was sitting on the bed, her hands trembling slightly. Who are you? Donna asked, fear evident in her voice. Cynthia felt as if someone had squeezed her heart. It's me, Mom. Cynthia, your daughter. Donna blinked several times, confusion slowly giving way to a glimmer of recognition. Oh, Cynthia, of course, I'm sorry, dear. I don't know what came over me. Cynthia sat on the edge of the bed, holding her mother's hands. It's okay, Mom. It happens. Do you need anything? Donna shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. I'm so sorry, Cynthia. I'm sorry for being a burden to you. The words hit Cynthia like a punch to the stomach. No, Mom. Don't say that. You're not a burden. You're my mother, and I love you. But even as the words left her mouth, Cynthia felt a pang of guilt. Because somewhere, deep in her mind, a small voice agreed with her mother. The next morning, at the office, Cynthia could barely focus on her work. The sleepless nights and constant worry were taking their toll. That's when Megan approached her desk, a mysterious smile on her lips. Hey, Cyn, I've got a surprise for you. Cynthia looked up, too tired to feign enthusiasm. What is it, Megan? Megan pulled up a chair and sat down next to Cynthia. Remember that dating site I told you about? Well, I kind of made a profile for you. You what? Cynthia exclaimed, shocked. Calm down, calm down. Megan raised her hands in a soothing gesture. I just wanted to help. And guess what? There's this amazing guy interested in you. Cynthia shook her head, incredulous. Megan, I don't have time for this. You know my situation. But Megan didn't give up. She pulled out her phone, quickly opening the dating app. Look, Cyn, his name is Richard Hartley. He's a businessman from New York. Rich, charming, and according to this, very interested in meeting you. Against her will, Cynthia found herself looking at the screen. The photo showed a middle-aged man, well-dressed, with a captivating smile. Her eyes skimmed the profile. World travel, successful business ventures, interests in art and culture. For a moment, Cynthia allowed herself to dream. What would her life be like if she could travel, dine at fancy restaurants, not worry about money? What would it be like to have someone to share her burdens, someone who could take care of her for a change? Megan, noticing Cynthia's hesitation, pressed on. Come on, Cyn. What's the harm in exchanging a few messages? You deserve a bit of happiness. Cynthia bit her lip, her heart torn between duty and desire. Finally, with a sigh of defeat, she nodded. Okay, but just a few messages, all right? Megan's face lit up with a triumphant smile. Sure. You'll see, this is going to change your life. That night, after putting Donna to bed, Cynthia sat in the dark living room, the phone glowing in her hands. She looked at Richard's first message, her heart beating a bit faster. Hello, Cynthia. It's a pleasure to meet you. I hope you don't mind that I reached out. Your profile intrigued me, and I'd love to get to know you better. Cynthia hesitated for a long moment before starting to type a reply. As the words flowed, she felt a mix of excitement and guilt. It was as if she were opening a door to a whole new world, a world where she wasn't just the devoted daughter, the tireless caregiver, a world where she could just be Cynthia. The following weeks passed in a blur of secret messages and forbidden dreams. Richard was everything Cynthia could wish for. Attentive, intelligent, always ready with a kind word or a fascinating story about his travels. Every conversation with Richard was a temporary escape from Cynthia's increasingly suffocating reality. While she cared for her mother during the day, battling endless bills at night, Richard's messages were like a beacon of hope, promising a different life, a better life. But as Cynthia delved deeper into this new connection, guilt grew. Every smile brought on by a message from Richard was followed by a pang of remorse as she looked at her mother. Every dream of a different life was accompanied by the crushing weight of responsibility. One night, while Cynthia was helping Donna get ready for bed, her mother surprised her with a moment of clarity. "You seem different, dear," Donna said, her eyes clear for the first time in weeks. "More light? Is something going on?" Cynthia froze, feeling like a child caught doing something wrong. "It's nothing, Mom, just work." Donna smiled, a fragile smile but full of love. "Whatever it is, I'm happy for you, my girl. You deserve to be happy." Her mother's words haunted Cynthia that night. Lying in bed, the silent phone beside her, she wondered, what is happiness? And at what cost does it come? As fall gave way to winter, Cynthia found herself increasingly torn between two worlds. The real world, with its crushing responsibilities and endless challenges, and the world of possibilities that Richard represented. Little did she know that soon she would be forced to choose between these two worlds, and that her choice would have consequences that would change her life forever. Winter in Connecticut had arrived with relentless ferocity, covering the small town with a frozen blanket of snow. For Cynthia Thompson, the outside chill was a perfect reflection of the ice that seemed to be forming around her heart. On a particularly frigid January morning, Cynthia woke up to the sound of her mother screaming. Leaping out of bed, she ran to Donna's room, her heart pounding frantically against her ribs. "Mom, what's wrong?" Cynthia asked, entering the room. Donna was sitting on the bed, her eyes wide with panic, her hands clutching the sheets so tightly that her knuckles were white. "Who are you? Where am I?" "Please, don't hurt me," Donna screamed, shrinking back as Cynthia approached. Cynthia felt as though she had been punched in the stomach. "Mom, it's me, Cynthia, your daughter. You're at home. It's okay." But Donna continued to look at her with fear and confusion. "Daughter? I don't have a daughter. You're lying." "Where's my husband, Frank? Frank, where are you?" The name of her father, who had been dead for so many years, echoed in the room like a ghost. Cynthia fought against the tears that threatened to fall. Taking a deep breath, she forced herself to stay calm. "It's okay, Mom. I'm going to call the doctor. Everything will be all right." But as she dialed Dr. Stevenson's number, Cynthia knew that nothing was okay, and maybe it never would be again. Hours later, sitting in Dr. Stevenson's office, Cynthia listened to the doctor's words as if they were coming from very far away. "Your mother's condition is deteriorating faster than we expected, Miss Thompson," Dr. Stevenson said, his voice gentle but firm. "There's a new experimental treatment that could help, but..." He hesitated, and Cynthia felt her heart sink. "But what, doctor?" The doctor sighed, removing his glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose. "It's very expensive, Miss Thompson, and it's not covered by insurance." "How much?" Cynthia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. When Dr. Stevenson mentioned the amount, Cynthia felt the world spinning around her. It was more money than she made in a year, more money than she could ever dream of having. I'll find a way," she said, more to herself than to the doctor. That night, after putting Donna to bed with the help of new medications, Cynthia sat at the kitchen table, piles of bills and bank statements spread out before her. The numbers danced before her eyes, each one representing another closed door, another lost hope. It was then that her phone buzzed, a message from Richard. "Hey, beautiful, how are you? I miss you. How about we escape for a weekend in New York? I'd love to see you." Cynthia looked at the message, feeling a mix of longing and guilt. What would it be like to escape, even for a moment? What would it be like to be just Cynthia, not the caregiver, not the devoted daughter, but just a woman? Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, ready to politely decline as she always did. But then her eyes fell on the pile of medical bills, and something inside her broke. "I'd love to," she typed back, her heart racing. "When?" Richard's reply was almost immediate. "How about this weekend? I can send a car to pick you up Friday night." Cynthia hesitated for a moment, thinking of her mother. But then she remembered Mrs. Peterson, the neighbor who sometimes helped with Donna. "Perfect," she replied. "I can't wait." When Friday arrived, Cynthia was a bundle of nerves. She had arranged for Mrs. Peterson to stay with Donna over the weekend, inventing a story about a work conference. "Are you sure you'll be okay, Mom?" Cynthia asked for the 100th time, adjusting Donna's pillows. Donna smiled. one of those rare, lucid smiles that made Cynthia's heart ache. "Of course, dear. Mrs. Peterson is great company. You deserve a break." Cynthia felt tears prick her eyes. She leaned in and kissed her mother's forehead. "I love you, Mom." "I love you too, my girl," Donna replied, her eyes already beginning to close from the effects of the medication. When the luxurious car arrived to pick her up, Cynthia felt as though she was about to cross a portal into another world. A world where she wasn't defined by her responsibilities and sacrifices. A world where she could be free. But as the car pulled away, taking her towards New York and Richard, Cynthia couldn't help but look back at the window of her mother's room. And for a moment, just for a moment, she wondered if she was making the biggest mistake of her life. What Cynthia didn't know, as the car took her away from everything she knew, was that this weekend in New York would only be the beginning. The beginning of a journey that would test not only her love and devotion, but also the limits of her own morality. As the familiar landscape of Connecticut gave way to the bright lights of the city that never sleeps, Cynthia closed her eyes, allowing herself, for the first time in years, to dream of a different future. A future where she didn't have to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders. A future with Richard. Little did she know that fate had other plans, and the choices she made in the coming days would change the course of her life forever. The lights of New York sparkled like thousands of earthly stars as Cynthia's car entered the city. Her heart raced, a mix of excitement and apprehension coursing through her veins. The bustling streets and towering skyscrapers seemed like a world apart from her life in Connecticut. The car stopped in front of an elegant building on the Upper East Side. Cynthia took a deep breath, adjusted the dress she had bought specifically for the occasion, and stepped out of the vehicle. The doorman smiled politely. "Good evening, Mr. Hartley is expecting you in apartment 1201. Cynthia nodded, feeling like an imposter in an urban fairy tale. The elevator ascended smoothly, each floor heightening her anxiety. When the doors opened on the 12th floor, she hesitated for a moment before walking down the luxurious corridor. Standing in front of apartment 1201, Cynthia closed her eyes for a moment, thinking of her mother, her life in Connecticut, and everything she was leaving behind, even if only temporarily. With one final sigh, she knocked on the door. The seconds seemed to drag on endlessly until the door finally opened. But the man who appeared was nothing like the profile picture Cynthia had seen. Richard Hartley sat in a wheelchair, his face pale and gaunt, very different from the tanned and healthy image she had expected. His eyes, however, shone with the same intensity that Cynthia recognized from their online conversations. "Cynthia?" Richard asked, his voice hoarse and hesitant. "Is that you?" Cynthia froze for a moment, unable to process the scene before her. "Yes, it's me," she finally managed to say. Richard smiled, a sad and weary smile. "Come in, please. I think we have a lot to talk about." The interior of the apartment was a shocking contrast to the building's exterior. Where Cynthia had expected to find luxury and opulence, she saw a small, modestly furnished space. The walls were bare, except for a few framed photographs of exotic landscapes, echoes of a life that seemed very distant from Richard's current reality. Richard maneuvered his wheelchair into the small living room, gesturing for Cynthia to sit on the worn-out sofa. "I imagine you're shocked," he said, his voice heavy with shame and regret. "I wasn't completely honest with you, Cynthia." Cynthia felt a wave of conflicting emotions: anger, confusion, disappointment, and surprisingly, compassion. "What's going on, Richard? Why did you lie?" Richard lowered his eyes, his hands trembling slightly in his lap. "I was lonely, Cynthia, so desperately lonely. When I saw your profile, something in your eyes, I just wanted a connection, someone to talk to. I never imagined it would go this far." He paused, coughing violently. Cynthia instinctively got up to help him, offering him a glass of water from the table beside him. "Richard, what happened to you?" she asked softly after the coughing subsided. "Cancer," he replied simply. "Late stage. The doctors say I have a few months at best." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and irrevocable. Cynthia felt her eyes fill with tears, not just for Richard, but for herself, for her shattered dreams of escape, of a different life. "I'm so sorry," Richard said, his voice breaking. "I never meant to deceive you. I just wanted to feel alive again, if only for a moment." Cynthia looked at the frail man before her, so different from the successful businessman she had imagined. She thought of her mother, at home, fighting her own battle against time and memory. And at that moment, something inside her broke and then reformed. "It's okay, Richard," she said, surprising herself with the softness in her voice. "I understand." And she truly did understand. She understood the loneliness, the desperation, the desire to escape reality, even if just for a brief moment. The next few hours passed in a blur of honest conversations and shared tears. Richard told Cynthia about his life, the trips he really took when he was younger, the businesses he actually had, the fortune he made and lost. And Cynthia, in turn, spoke about her mother, about the burden of being a caregiver, about her deferred dreams. When morning came, it found them both asleep, Richard in his wheelchair, Cynthia on the sofa, a thin blanket covering her shoulders. The rising New York sun illuminated the small apartment, casting a golden light over the improbable scene. Cynthia woke first, blinking in confusion for a moment before remembering where she was. She looked at Richard, still asleep, and felt a wave of contradictory emotions. Anger at the lie, compassion for the lonely and sick man, and deep sadness for the life that could have been. She got up quietly, grabbed her purse, and walked to the door. With her hand on the doorknob, she hesitated, looking back at Richard. For a moment, she considered leaving without saying anything, going back to Connecticut and pretending that none of this had happened. But then she thought of her mother, of what it would be like if Donna were alone, with no one to care for her. With a sigh, Cynthia returned, picked up a piece of paper and a pen, and wrote a note. "Richard, I can't promise I'll stay, but I promise I'll come back. No one deserves to be alone. Cynthia." She placed the note where Richard could easily see it and left the apartment, closing the door softly behind her. In the elevator, descending to the reality of a New York morning, Cynthia allowed herself to cry, for Richard, for her mother, for herself, and for the dreams she was leaving behind. But when the doors opened in the lobby, she wiped away the tears and straightened her shoulders. She had a choice to make now. A choice that would define not just her future, but also the kind of person she wanted to be. And as she walked through the busy streets of Manhattan, Cynthia Thompson began to understand that sometimes true strength lies not in running from our responsibilities, but in embracing them with compassion and courage. What she didn't know was that, back in Connecticut, events were unfolding that would change the course of her life forever. The decision she would make in the next few hours would not only seal her fate, but also that of her mother and everyone around her. The Sunday afternoon sun cast long shadows over the streets of Connecticut as Cynthia finally arrived home. The weight of the events in New York still bore down on her shoulders, but a new urgency quickened her steps. During the drive back, she had received a frantic call from Mrs. Peterson. "Cynthia, dear, you need to come back immediately." The elderly woman's trembling voice echoed in her mind. "Your mother, she's missing." Now, standing in front of her house, Cynthia felt her heart pound erratically against her ribs. She opened the door with trembling hands, calling for the neighbor. "Mrs. Peterson, I'm home." The elderly woman appeared in the kitchen doorway, her face marked by tears and worry. "Oh, Cynthia, thank God you're here. What happened?" Cynthia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Where's my mom?" Mrs. Peterson took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. I don't know. Last night, she seemed fine. Took her meds and went to bed. But this morning, when I went to wake her for breakfast, she wasn't there." Cynthia felt the world spinning around her. "What do you mean, she wasn't there?" She managed to articulate. "The bed was empty," Mrs. Peterson continued. "The front door was unlocked. I looked everywhere, called the neighbors. No one saw her." Panic surged in Cynthia's chest like a dark, suffocating wave. "Did you call the police?" Yes, they've been here. They're searching, but..." Mrs. Peterson's voice faltered. They said, given her condition, and with this cold. Cynthia didn't wait for her to finish. Grabbing the phone, she dialed the local police station with shaking fingers. "Connecticut Police Department. How can I help you?" A male voice answered, "This is Cynthia Thompson. My mother, Donna Thompson, is missing. I need to know if there's any news." There was a pause on the other end of the line, the sound of papers shuffling. "Miss Thompson," the officer said, his voice taking on a gentler tone. "I'm Detective Jack O'Brien. I'm personally handling your mother's case. Can we meet? There are some things we need to discuss." The detective's tone made Cynthia's blood run cold. "Sure," she replied mechanically. "Where and when?" "How about right now, at the station?" It's urgent." 20 minutes later, Cynthia was sitting in a stark room at the police station, facing Detective O'Brien. He was a middle-aged man with kind eyes that contrasted with his serious expression. "Miss Thompson," he began, clasping his hands on the table. "We have some concerns regarding your mother's disappearance." Cynthia felt her heart tighten. "What kind of concerns?" O'Brien cleared his throat, uncomfortable. "We received a report. From Sister Margaret, from the local church. She claims your mother had expressed fear of you in recent weeks." The shock hit Cynthia like a punch to the stomach. Fear of me? "But that's absurd. I've dedicated my life to caring for her." O'Brien nodded, his face a mask of professional neutrality. "But given your mother's medical history, and now this sudden disappearance, well, we have to investigate all possibilities." The detective's words echoed in Cynthia's mind. All possibilities. Suddenly, the reality of the situation hit her with full force. She wasn't just a worried daughter anymore, she was a suspect. The following hours passed in a blur of questions, statements, and an endless parade of concerned faces. Neighbors, acquaintances, even her co-workers were questioned. Cynthia watched, dazed, as her life was dissected, every decision scrutinized, every sacrifice questioned. It was late in the afternoon, as the sun was setting on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, that the phone at the station rang. O'Brien answered, his expression changing as he listened. "All right. We're on our way," he said, hanging up and turning to Cynthia. "They've found your mother." Cynthia's heart leapt. "Where? Is she okay?" O'Brien hesitated for a moment. "She's alive. She was found at a church in a neighboring town. It seems she boarded a fishing boat by mistake." Cynthia didn't wait for him to finish. Standing up, she grabbed her purse. "Take me to her, now." The drive to the neighboring town seemed to take forever. When they finally arrived at the small red brick church, Cynthia barely waited for the car to stop before jumping out. Inside the church, surrounded by concerned and kind faces, was Donna. She looked smaller, more fragile than Cynthia remembered, wrapped in a blanket, her eyes vacant and confused. "Mom?" Cynthia called softly, approaching. Donna looked at her, blinking slowly. For a terrible moment, there was no recognition in her eyes. Then, slowly, a faint smile formed on her lips. "Hello, dear. Did you come to get me?" Donna asked, her voice no more than a whisper. Cynthia felt the tears she had been holding back for hours finally spill over. "Yes, Mom, I'm here. Let's go home." As she helped her mother to her feet, gently supporting her, Cynthia noticed Detective O'Brien watching them. There was something in his eyes, no longer suspicion, but a mix of compassion and guilt. "Miss Thompson," he said, approaching, "I owe you an apology. It seems we made a mistake in—" Cynthia raised a hand, interrupting him. "Not now, Detective. Please, I just want to take my mother home." O'Brien nodded, stepping back respectfully. "Of course. We'll be in touch to finalize the details." As she guided Donna out of the church, Cynthia felt the weight of the past few days on her shoulders. The fear, the guilt, the anger, all seemed insignificant now, in the face of the relief of having her mother back. But as they walked under the starry Connecticut sky, Cynthia knew this was not the end of her journey. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, one that would require more strength, more courage, and more love than she had ever imagined. What she didn't know was that, watching from afar, a silent figure observed their departure. Sister Margaret, the nun who had made the report, watched the scene with a mix of relief and remorse. She knew she had made a mistake and was determined to make it right. The months following Donna's return were an emotional roller coaster for Cynthia. The daily routine of caring for her now even more fragile mother mixed with frequent visits to the local church's senior center. It was during one of these visits that Cynthia met Sister Margaret face to face for the first time. The nun was arranging flowers at the altar when Cynthia entered the small chapel. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the air seemed charged with unspoken tension. "Miss Thompson," Sister Margaret spoke first, her voice surprisingly gentle. "It's good to see you here." Cynthia hesitated, the conflicting emotions evident on her face. "Sister Margaret, I wanted to talk to you." The nun nodded, placing the last bouquet of flowers in place. "Come, let's talk in the garden. It's a beautiful day." Side by side, the two women walked in silence to a wooden bench surrounded by rose bushes. The sweet aroma of the flowers hung in the air, contrasting with the difficult conversation ahead. "Why did you do that?" Cynthia finally asked, her voice trembling with contained emotion. "Why did you report me to the police?" Sister Margaret took a deep breath, her eyes fixed on the roses in front of her. "I saw a woman on the brink of collapse, Cynthia. I saw the weight you carried, the desperation in your eyes. And I saw your mother, confused and scared. But I never," Cynthia started, but the nun gently raised her hand. "I know you would never intentionally hurt your mother, but sometimes our love can blind us to the real needs of those we care about." Sister Margaret's words struck Cynthia like a lightning bolt. Tears began to stream down her face as years of exhaustion, guilt, and fear finally overflowed. "I just wanted to take care of her," Cynthia sobbed. "I just wanted to be a good daughter." Sister Margaret placed a comforting hand on Cynthia's shoulder. "And you are, my dear, but now it's time to take care of yourself, too." In the weeks that followed, Cynthia became increasingly involved with the church's work. The senior center became a refuge, a place where she could use her experience to help others in the same situation she had been in. It was during one of these days at the center that Cynthia received an unexpected call. The hoarse, weak voice on the other end of the line made her heart ache. "Cynthia, it's Richard. I don't have much time." Richard's words took her back to that night in New York, to the disappointment and compassion she had felt. "Richard, Please," he interrupted gently. "I just wanted to thank you for not judging me, for showing kindness to an old fool. You gave me one last glimpse of humanity, Cynthia. Thank you." The call ended, leaving Cynthia in a whirlwind of emotions. She looked around the center, at the smiling faces of the seniors, at Sister Margaret helping a lady with her lunch, and something inside her shifted. That night, sitting by her mother's bed, Cynthia made a decision. "Mom," she said softly, holding Donna's hand, "I've been thinking, and I think I've found my way." Donna looked at her, her eyes momentarily clear and focused. "What way, dear?" Cynthia smiled, feeling a peace she hadn't experienced in years. "I think I'm going to join the church, Mom. As a nun." The following months were transformative. Cynthia began her novitiate, splitting her time between religious studies and caring for her mother and other seniors at the center. Each day, she felt she was getting closer to finding her true purpose. It was on a quiet autumn morning, almost a year after Donna's disappearance, that Cynthia woke with a strange feeling. Rushing to her mother's room, she found Donna sitting on the bed, a serene smile on her face. "Good morning, my dear," Donna said, her voice stronger than Cynthia had heard in months. "Mom, are you feeling all right?" Donna nodded, reaching out her hand to her daughter. "I've never felt so at peace as Cynthia. I'm so proud of you, my girl." Cynthia took her mother's hand, feeling the love and gratitude flowing between them. For hours, they talked, laughed, and cried together as they hadn't done in years. As the sun began to set, Donna closed her eyes, still smiling. Cynthia, now Sister Cynthia, held her mother's hand until her last breath. Donna's funeral was a celebration of life and love. The small church was packed, not only with local residents, but with many of the seniors and families Cynthia had helped throughout the year. Sister Margaret stepped up to the pulpit, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Donna Thompson was not only the mother of our dear sister Cynthia," she began. "She was a symbol of unconditional love, of perseverance, and above all, of redemption." As Sister Margaret spoke about Donna and Cynthia's journey, about love, forgiveness, and second chances, Cynthia felt a wave of emotions wash over her. Sadness for the loss of her mother, yes, but also a deep gratitude for the journey that had brought them here. When the service ended and the church bells began to ring, Cynthia stepped out into the garden. The crisp autumn air brushed her face, and she looked up at the sky, imagining her mother smiling down at her. "Sister Cynthia?" Sister Margaret's gentle voice brought her back to the present. "It's time." Cynthia nodded, taking a deep breath. "Yes, it is. Time to continue the work." Side by side, the two nuns walked back to the church, ready to face the challenges and joys that the future would bring. And as the bells continued to ring, echoing through the small town of Connecticut, Cynthia knew her journey of redemption was just beginning. Donna's legacy would live on through her, in every life she touched, in every heart she helped to heal. And in that knowledge, Sister Cynthia found the peace and purpose she had been searching for. As the church bells kept ringing, their melody echoing through the small town of Connecticut, Sister Cynthia reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She realized that life, like the seasons, is in constant flux. The winter of her pain had given way to a spring of renewal and purpose. Cynthia's story reminds us that redemption is not a destination, but a continuous journey. Every choice we make, every act of kindness, every moment of understanding brings us a step closer to becoming the best version of ourselves. Just as Cynthia found her way through unconditional love and serving others, we all have the power to transform our lives and the lives of those around us. Sometimes, it is in the darkest hours that we discover our brightest inner light. May Cynthia's story serve as a reminder that it's never too late for a new beginning, and that true love, whether for family, strangers, or ourselves, has the power to heal and transform. Dear viewer, I hope this story has touched your heart as much as it touched mine in telling it. If you were moved by Cynthia's journey, please be sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video. Your support encourages me to continue sharing these moving and inspiring stories. I am immensely grateful for your time in following this narrative. Each of you who watches and engages with these stories becomes part of this amazing community we are building together. Stay tuned for the next story. I'm sure it will be just as emotional and touching as this one. Until then, remember, each of us has a story of redemption waiting to be written. What will yours be? Thank you so much, and see you next time.